Okay, so I spent pretty much all of yesterday cleaning parts and scraping gaskets, and I finished stripping the block down, got the locator studs out of the head deck, scraped all the gaskets off the side of it. I got all the plugs out of the ports except for that guy. I might have to drill that one. He doesn't want to move, or I'm gonna have to get the big torch out. I don't know. I don't really want heat on the block with that, but I gotta get that one out yet. But I found all sorts of interesting things. For instance, the freeze plug that, well, for starters, this back cam bearing is like, it's got a step worn in it. I don't know if you can see it on, you can kind of see it on camera right there. That back cam bearing was definitely shot. And then at the back of the cam bore back here, there's supposed to be a freeze plug to keep the oil trapped inside the cam journal. And where did I throw it? Right there. Rather than having a freeze plug, they had like hole sawed out a brass puck and put it in there and shellacked it in with some sort of gasket sealer. It's older than RTV, but some sort of silicone, and they just stuck it in that hole, and so it wasn't even a freeze plug. So that was the first that was the first thing I found. You can't destroy that. The rear main, we are wondering, and we'll know for sure, well, we'll never know for sure, but it's a possibility as to why this rear main is shot. There's no babbitt on that rear main whatsoever. You know, there's a little bit right there, but for the most part the rear main's gone. Dad and one of his guys were here working on cylinders yesterday, and they were talking before I got here. Good possibility that the reason the main bearings are in such bad shape is because of that shaft being screwed up in the 3-speed and that really bad vibration that the driveline would get. If it was bad enough to shake the entire tractor, like rattle you out of the seat shake, Lord only knows what kind of a beating that crankshaft was taking, trying to hold everything together in the bottom end of the motor while that input shaft was out here doing whatever the hell it wanted to inside that pilot bearing. So there's a good possibility that's why, a very, very good possibility, that's why the main bearings are junk, is because of that vibration it had. So there's that. The other thing that I was questioning, and I called Maybaugh today and got bearings lined up. They actually had the bearings I needed on the shelf, go figure. Because right now 310 bearings are kind of hard to come by because of supply chain issues. But when I took this apart, it had this tapered collar pressed on the end of the crank. And there's some weird shit going on here, ladies and gentlemen. They had this tapered collar pressed on the end of the crank, and the crank pulley, which is buried over there, had a tapered bore to match this tapered collar. And any Waukesha I've ever worked on, and I talked to him at Maybaugh about it too, and they've never seen one like this. Every Waukesha ever is just a straight stub on the end of the crankshaft, and the pulley just presses on. It doesn't have this taper. And looking at it now, I'm wondering if at some point the crank pulley came loose. Teeter, get out of the way. And that Keyway's ate out. I can see it now that I look at it. That's neat. So this might go back together just the way it is, because if that crank pulley, if that's... Huh. I did not see that yesterday when I was looking at it. If that keyway's 8 out, there's the only good way to fix that is to weld it shut and cut a new keyway, and that's not exactly something you want to be doing on a crank. Yeah, that key slot's broke out. That's neat. Huh. So I might be putting it back together with that crank pulley. I was gonna get a different one coming that was just straight press on, but with that key slot being roached, I don't necessarily know if I want to screw with it. It was obviously working before and it wasn't leaking any oil, so... Huh. Well, that's neat. But anyway, and 310 cranks are not easy to find. It took us... We got lucky because you can buy brand new 310 cranks, but they're Chinese, they're not forged, they're cast, they're expensive, and they break. So you don't want to buy the brand new ones because they're junk right out of the box. And finding a good used one is hard. And when we found the one from a 1955, we got lucky. And Dad found one on eBay. And the only reason we ended up with it was the guy that owned the tractor was going through a divorce. And they were splitting everything up. And she wanted her half of everything. So rather than giving her the tractor, he cut the son of a bitch in half right behind the fuel tank with an abrasive saw. I shit you not, that is the exact story, because we got it from a salvage yard. That is the exact story that the yard owner gave us. Was this tractor came in a perfect tractor, other than the fact that it was sawed in half right in the middle of the fuel tank. Fuel tank frame, whole thing sawed right in half. So he was parting out the good stuff, and it had a good crank in it, so we got a good virgin crank out of a 1755. Teeter, what is your damn problem? Stay home. So that's the only reason that we ended up with a crank for the 1955, and that crank cost us $800, and that was like 11 years ago, so Lord knows what the hell one would run you now if you could find one. But, so I really don't want to have to replace this crank just because of a keyway. All of the journals, I went through and mic'd everything out yesterday. All the mains are roughly 20 under. They're all measuring about 2 inches 605. Two of them are actually fat. Two of them are measuring 2 inches 606. So they were actually still oversized for 20 under. Because stock grind on the main journals is 2 inches 625. So 20 under would be 2 inches 605. So those number 5 and number 1 were actually still fat. And then the rod journals are measuring pretty much stock, roughly 2 inches 435. And what was wait, that page. 2 inches 436 to 2 inches, or 2 inches 437 and a half to 2 inches 436 and a half. So, and they're all measuring roughly 2 inches 435 to 2 inches 436. So, a 10 under grind on the rod journals would clean them up, and a 30 under grind on the main journals would clean them up. So the crank is within spec to grind. Like I say, I got the bearings. My name's on them. They're sitting on the shelf. So I didn't get them coming yet because after thinking about all the vibration that this thing has gone through because of that screwed up input shaft on the 3-speed, I want to have it magnaflux to make sure it's not cracked before we put any money into it, grinding it and getting bearings and whatnot. So, we're taking it down to the machine shop today. The same shop that ground the one on my 19. Actually, I think we just had it polished. Or did we have it ground? We might have had it ground 10 under on everything. I can't remember. Either way, they are 3 to 4 weeks out on getting it ground. They're not far behind, but I was hoping I could sweet talk them into getting it magnaflux right away, so that I at least know I have a good crank. That way I can go ahead and get the bearings coming and all that, and not waste money on getting the bearings here to find out the crank's junk, to find out I got to send the bearings back and get a different set and find a different crank. So that's that. That Keyway is really kind of bumming me out, but I don't. They obviously, I mean, they did a decent job of fixing it with that tapered pulley. So I don't know, we'll find out. The other fun thing I found out was on the rods. They still have the 2-piece wrist pin bushings. And which one? That one. Yeah, right there. I did not push that wrist pin bushing out. It was like that when I took the pistons apart yesterday. And it was already cracking. So that thing was only about a 1/4 inch away from this thing going from an overhaul to a Cummins conversion, because that's what the 2-piece wrist pin bushings did. They would push out and either lock up the wrist pin, and the wrist pin would start turning inside of the piston and break the snap rings and do all sorts of fun stuff, or it would come out and seize the whole assembly and break rods and all sorts of, yeah. 2-piece wrist pin bushings, not good. I don't know what dumbass thought that was a good idea, but they were not. It was not a good idea. So I just about shit a brick when I was pulling these apart and found that. It's the only one that was doing it. This is number 5. So maybe this whole ordeal was her way of saying, hey, we better get an overhaul done now, or we're gonna have a lot bigger problems than just blowing head gaskets. So that was all the fun stuff I found. Oh, and I mic'd the cam. And everything on the cam came out, or all the journals on the cam came out good. Stock grind is 2 inches, 74.95. And all 3 of these journals are 2 inches, 749, except for this one, which is 2 inches, 74.85. It's actually a little fatter than that, but I rounded down. It's not quite 2 inches, 749. Or 1 inch 749, sorry, not 2 inches, 1 inch 749. So the cam journals mic out there within spec. That smaller one is right at the bottom end of within spec, but it's still within spec. So, and I've never heard of anybody replacing a cam on one of these. They're just, if it was a race engine spinning 7,000 RPM, okay, it's just an old diesel spinning 2,600 RPM, you're good. So yeah, but really that's all I found that's interesting. All I still got to do is obviously got to tear the head down so we can take that in to get flux now, and I want to tear the oil pump apart, clean the inside of it up, and make sure there's nothing out of the ordinary inside that, but it still feels tight. No weird feeling in the when you roll it over by hand, so should just be clean it up, inspect it, put it back together, be good to go. So that's what I'm going to do today, is get the oil pump apart, get the head apart. We'll get everything organized. It's got to go to the machine shop. The crank's going today, and we should be all done with the engine for now by in a few hours, and then we start working on the 3-speed, which will be a different video. So, well, I just got a good little bit of news. Dad walked in right after I got done doing the, or telling you what all we got going on here, and said he got a phone call this morning that we're losing the building out on the highway where we keep all the equipment. So that's neat. So I just spent the last hour on the phone calling pole barn, or getting numbers and calling all the barn builders around here. Naturally, none of them answered their phone. I don't know if they're off for the holidays. Most of them are Amish, so they're hard to get a hold of to begin with. But so that's how my morning went. So it looks like I'm putting up a barn sooner rather than later, because we can't have all that stuff sitting outside. She can stay outside. She's been getting antsy. Now, because the oil pump on this, it's a wet sump, the oil pump is submerged in oil. Because of that, there's no actual seals in it. They just rely on the oil to seal itself. They just figure on a certain small amount of leakage. But everything looks good. But I want to get this all the way apart and get all the old oil out of it and everything, because it had water in it. This is your relief screw. This is one of those parts where it's one of the spots where you set your oil pressure. Now when you take this out, you want to count the number of full turns. That way, what did they do? Just bottom it out? That's what would appear. Oh, wow. Okay, I'm going to put this in the vise right quick. Alright. So, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 turns. 9.5. And then you gotta get your relief poppet out. Which is always a good time. There it went. And we got to drive this roll pin out so that we can get this gear off, and then the shaft drops out the bottom. And then once you got the drive sprocket off, your main driver comes out. And then your idler comes out. And that's basically all there is. Pretty simple oil pump. There's a bushing here, a bushing there, and the idler's not bushed, and the bottom is not bushed. So, but it shouldn't really have to be. It's constantly running in oil, and it's not a high pressure pump, so it's not like it sees a whole lot of side draft from the pump case being pressurized. So I'm going to clean these parts up in the solvent tank, and then I'll bring the book up and we will get the mics out, because I think the book gives you some dimensions to measure the shaft and everything to make sure it's all still in spec. And we'll visually inspect it, make sure there's nothing wrong. I don't see anything wrong. It was a clean, other than having water in the oil, the crankcase was clean, other than some sludge from water being in the oil. So it's not like the pump ate anything foreign. So there's no and it held good oil pressure somehow. The way those bearings were, it should have never held the oil pressure it did. But so there's no reason to believe that there's anything major wrong with the pump. So I'm gonna get this stuff cleaned up and we'll go from there. Okay, so it looks like we're gonna be getting some pump parts. They don't give you actual dimensions as far as like measure the shaft, it's going to be this dimension, measure the bushings, it's going to be this dimension. They give you running clearances. So you got to measure the shaft and the bushing and subtract one from the other to get your running clearance. So the upper end of the shaft measures 491, the lower end measures 623. And then the bushing, the upper end measures 522, the lower bushing measures 628. So you subtract 491 from 522, gives you your running clearance of 031. And same thing down here, and you get a running clearance of 005, or a half a thou. So, you take that and you go over here to shaft running clearance and lower bushing. Maximum is a half a thou, so we are right on the edge with the lower bushing. And upper bushing, the maximum is a half a thou, and we are at over 3 thou. So the bushings are shot. And then on the idler gear, this guy that rides on this shaft, the shaft measures 622 and the bore of the idler measures 6255. So you subtract those two and you get 0035, which is at it's basically minimum standard. So this is still basically at factory spec new tolerance. So that's fine, and the shaft, or the idler shaft, is fine, so we're good there. So, and then they also give you a free length dimension for the spring, which is 1 5/16", which is 1.9375, and this measures basically 1.905. So that spring is partially collapsed. So we're gonna have to get a spring. We're gonna have to get a lower bushing and an upper bushing, because if we're gonna do the upper bushing, you might as well do them both. And then I think I'm gonna end up seeing about a shaft, because I don't know if you can hear it. The shaft is wore. So, but the rest of the pump checks out good. So everything else is kosher. It's just the shaft and both bushings and the spring. So obviously can't put that back together, and I looked and they didn't send the gasket to put the pump back together neither, so even if I wanted to, I couldn't put it all the way back together. So the pump's going to go in a bag, and I'm going to write or add that stuff to the list, and that part's done. All right, I got the head up here on the bench. I'm probably going to wait till the morning to tear this down. This whole day's just kind of gone to shit. Not been a good day since I walked through the door this morning. We did get the crank run in. We took the gear off the end of it, and the key. If I can get the key out of the box. Come here. Come here, you dirty bastard. That's what's left of the Woodruff key. So there's good news and bad news with it. The good news is the damage to the keyway is not nearly as bad as it initially looked. The part that was broke out is only maybe not quite a ½ inch long. Probably like 5/16 long, just a little like right out of the very front corner of one side of the key slot. And it's a Woodruff key, so it's a nice deep slot, and the key was still very well seated down in the slot. The slot's still on location. Everything past that point on one side and everything behind it is still all in good shape, so the key slot is still a viable key slot, and the part that broke out has nothing to do. Everything important is back behind, or back inside of this gear, and this gear is press fit onto the end of the crank. So once that's on there, that key cannot roll. It's kind of a wonder. It would appear that at some point that crank pulley had come loose, because the end of the crankshaft outboard of that sprocket, because that sprocket protected the part of the crank journal that it was pressed onto, so everything that's still press fit, that's still on location. Everything with the timing gear is kosher. We're good there. But everything outboard of that was a little boogered up. It's about, oh, what did Dad say? About 5 thou undersize, I think, is what Dad, because Dad mic'd the crank. But it's at least still fairly true. So when that crank pulley, the way it's wore, it's narrow. It's got a fat spot in the center, and then it's narrow again. So it's like the pulley was on the crank doing this. So I've got the crank out right now. I wasn't able to actually talk to the machinist. I talked to the counter guy. I'm probably going to call down to the machine shop tomorrow and explain the situation, and just make sure that we weren't playing a telephone game and shit got lost in translation, and I can actually talk to the guy. But before we get too gung-ho about making any decisions on it, the crank's got to get Magnaflux, make sure it's got no cracks from having that input shaft on the 3-speed fucked up. And then once we're there, we know that the rest of the crank is within grinding tolerance, so the rest of the crank is salvageable. Dad's going to call around, see if there's any places around here to do spray welding, to see if they can spray weld just the very, very tip of the crankshaft where that is, and then they can grind it back into spec so that the crank pulley will actually press on like it's supposed to. In all reality, there's really no reason, if I got the correct not fabric cobbled crank pulley, because this, like I said earlier, this tapered collar and everything, that's not. I'm curious to know what kind of hocus pocus, who did that, who came up with that, or if that was some sort of actual Waukesha fix. Because this, I could not find that in parts book. I called Mayball this morning to get them started working on finding me bearing sets. Ironically, they had both sets I needed on the shelf. But I talked to the mechanic while I was on the phone with him, and neither he nor I can find anything in any of the parts books about that taper lock crank pulley like that. So if I can get the right crank pulley for it, as long as you torque that nut down to spec like it's supposed to be, everything is held in tension. So by all rights, the crank is still true enough that the pulley should be on the center of the crank. Everything should still be okay if we can't get it spray welded and built back up. It would just be nice to get it spray welded and built back up so that it's back in spec and everything fits like it's supposed to. But before we get too gung-ho about that, need to find out if the crank's even worth a shit and it's not cracked. Hopefully it's not. Otherwise, we're going to go down a whole rabbit hole that I do not want to have to go down. I don't know how we keep getting these. I don't know how we keep getting the good ones. We're going down the exact same road that my 1955 was in, where some guy had been in there working on it that should have never been working on it, and literally everything we touch is fucked up in some way, shape, or form. So, I swear to God, not all 310s are like this. We just somehow managed to pick the good ones. I don't know. So, anyway, taking that crank down, I just rode with Dad. Dad had to run some errands, so that burned up a couple, 2-3 hours of the day, and I've been worried as hell about this barn situation. I finally just got my first phone call back from a builder. They're about like everybody else in any sort of trade right now. They are swamped with work. So my initial, how I wanted this whole thing to play out was I wanted to wait till about middle of next summer after we got through wheat and everything and things are starting to calm down, and I wanted to save money and put it up myself. Well, now that we're losing that barn out on the highway, which we didn't own, we've been like not renting. We basically have been using that barn in exchange for we take care of the property since shit. Probably right after we got my 66, because it's before we had any of the big equipment. I was just, probably since I was like 9 or 10, so at least 18 years we've been using that barn. And we always knew we was going to sell it when the time came. And we were hoping it was going to work out in such a way where either Dad or I could buy it. Well, the way things are looking for next year, it's happening in such a way that neither Dad or I can afford it right now. In all reality, he's not asking too much money for it. And if there was more tillable ground there, I would jump on it in a heartbeat. But that red barn we use is basically 4 walls and a roof. And whoever built it did a shit job. They didn't trim the roof out. It's not built square. The whole building is racked like a foot. Corner to corner, it's not square. I mean, that red barn, other than the fact that it was cheap storage, is shit. The gray pole barn that's there is actually a nice barn, but it's only basically a 2-bay garage, so it's not much storage. And then there's only 2 acres tillable. So, but with the outlook for next year, I can't swing that kind of money anyway, even if I wanted to. So I'm stuck with putting up this barn, and it has not been a good day, I tell you what. We started off decent, and then just like an hour into it, everything went to shit. Now I'm worried about that, and I'm wishing that like a month ago when I chisel plowed it, everything was fine. He wanted me to just leave him a trail so he can get back to his woods, because he wanted to cut a trail through his woods for deer hunting and whatnot and everything like that. And then here we are a few weeks later, and boom, he's selling it. I wish I'd have known this 2 months ago, because if I'd have known this 2 months ago, I would have never tore into this project. I'd have never bought that planter. I'd have put all the money that's going toward this into getting this damn barn put up. But now I got a new planter sitting up there that I probably shouldn't have bought now. I got this all tore apart. We kind of got to finish this project because if you quit right now, we got parts scattered all over. Shit's going to get lost. So this has got to get finished. I'm not going to lie. I'm stressed to fuck right now. The other thing I was hoping when the time did come to put this barn up, because I hate borrowing money, despise it. I was grown up. I don't like owing people money. I don't like owing the bank money. When I buy something, I want it to be free and clear. I want it to be mine. And I was hoping everything was going to work out, where when it came time to put this barn up, I just do it all in cash. Well, now I'm probably going to have to borrow money to get it up in time. And I just... oh, boy, I'm stressed. This is the... happy fucking New Year to me. So, anyway, now that I've rambled enough, I'm going to go in and talk to Dad about this barn situation and get some ideas from him as to how to go about laying it out as far as doors and whatnot, and try to figure something that we'll get back to this head in the morning. So we'll catch you guys tomorrow. Okay, so after we got over the shock of the whole barn situation yesterday, today's doing a little better. I've still only gotten one phone call back, but I knew it was going to kind of be a chore to get a hold of guys, being the time of year as it is. And most of the builders that I have numbers for are all Amish. And I don't know if anybody's ever tried to communicate with Amish barn builders before, but it's not easy. They'll build you one hell of a barn, but trying to get a hold of them is a chore. So hopefully I start getting some phone calls back here in the next few days. Start getting some quotes around so I go figure out the money situation. But anyway, before I start working on this head, does anybody have so many spare parts laying around that they forget what they have? Because I was thinking about this whole between being worried about the barn and the crank situation that I'm in when I left here yesterday. I got to thinking, you know, we have what is supposedly a complete spare 310 block. It's a non-oil cooler, so I don't know what it's exactly what it's out of. But it's supposed to be a 310 block, and it's got a crank sitting in it. And I was like, you know, if that crank's in better shape than the one they took out of this, it's probably going to be a little rusty. But that's fine. It can be cleaned up. So I was like, you know, I probably ought to at least pull that thing down off the shelf and see what we're looking at. So I just got off the Agco Parts Book website, and I looked up all of the different variations of the 310 block, and every single 310 diesel from the 1800C up to a 1955, the crank part number is a 155893A. So hopefully I can go get this block down off the shelf, and we can look at that crank while it's still in the block and see if we can find that part number. And if it's a 155893 crank, we're going to pull it out and mic it and see if it's in better shape than the one that I pulled out of here. And that's going to be the crank going in it. Because I just went down and looked at it to make sure that I was thinking right, that we had a crank, and there is a crank in it, and the end of it is not all ate up. So that, just the stub where the crank pulley runs, is already in better shape. So if it's an overall better crank, we might have a better crank to go back in this. So I'm going to go do some digging and get that thing down off the shelf, and we'll look and see if it's the right part number crank. Okay, here we are. This is actually, they had this, where's it at? They had this thing, like, bolted over the bottom of the crankcase. This is the first time I've actually ever had it off to look in here and see what we got. This thing definitely has a very, very broke camshaft. But they must have deemed the crank good, because somebody took the time to actually wrap it in tape and put, yeah, what's the stuff called that they used to put on machine parts for shipping? Name's slipping me now. But it's been coated so that it doesn't rust, so the journals don't rust up. So somebody must have deemed it a good crank. And I couldn't find the part number on it, but I found the casting number, and I called Maybaugh, and that casting number 221411 comes up as a 310 diesel crank. So I am going to get this thing out of the block, and we'll take it up to the shop and clean it up and mic it and see where the journals are at. And if this crank mics out better than the one I took in, we're going to take this one down, bring mine back, and get this one ground. I'm guessing just by what I see that this crank is probably going to be in better shape. So I can actually already tell you it's in better shape because the end of it's not all, well, first off, the key slot's not broke, and second off, the end of the shaft isn't all whopped up. So things might be looking up. I completely forgot we had this thing. This is working out pretty handy. All right, so that other crank, that thing was beautiful. It was a completely standard virgin crank, never been ground. To be completely honest, you damn near could have got away with throwing standard bearings in it and running it. The only reason I didn't, Dad actually just took it down to the machine shop to swap it out with the original crank. The only reason I didn't was the number 7 main journal up against the flywheel had some rust pitting in it. Apparently when it was sitting in the block, it must have got some condensation in the lower bearing shell, and about half the crank had a little bit. It wasn't bad, you could barely feel it, but you could see it. So it's going to have a 10 under ground on, or 10 under grind on everything. I had one rod journal that was slightly undersized, and for some reason it had 2 rod journals that were fat. I don't know, because 2 inches 436 and a half is the, was that the lower end? Just let me get to the page here. Where's the page? There's the page. On the rods, yeah, 2 inches 436 and a half is the lower end, and 2 inches 430. Okay, so it had, never mind, it didn't have 2 that were fat. I was thinking of the bottom end. So it had 2, those 2 were top end. That one were in the middle, but this guy right here was a half a thou under. So that number 2 rod journal meant that the rest of them had to get ground. I mean, there was a time when guys would see something like that, they would grind the one rod journal 10 under, throw a single 10 under bearing in it, and put the rest back to standard. I'm having all the journals ground standard, or ground 10 under, so that all the rods match. And then all of the main journals were like, that one right there is right dead nuts on factory tolerance, 2 inches 625. The rest of them were all a half a thou under, and number 7 was at the bottom end. 2 inches 624 is the bottom end of factory tolerance for a standard main bearing journal, which would stand to reason that that's the one with the most wear, because that's the one that supports the flywheel, so that makes sense. And that's main number 7 had that rust pitting in it, so a 10 under grind should take care of it. But if it wasn't for that rust pitting, I mean, you could run your finger across the journals, they were smooth as a baby's ass. I mean, that crank was immaculate, other than that rust pitting in number 7. So a 10 under straight grind across all the journals should take care of it. The end of the crank was beautiful where the key goes. There was just a little teeny tiny bit of a seal groove in the flywheel end of the crankshaft, so we'll still probably get a seal with a repair sleeve on it, but I mean, all in all, that crank is 10 times better than the one that came out of it. So I'm not going to scrap the old crank. I think it's very easily savable. And here I just got done saying not too long ago that 310 cranks are hard to come by, and I had one sitting down in the barn that I forgot about. That was lucky. But my plan for the crank that came out of this, because everything on it that's wrong with it is fixable, we will probably, I'm just going to take it down and throw it on the shelf. I might just throw it back in that block so it's protected. But I'm going to save it for now, and then maybe next summer or next fall when I got some money laying around, hopefully, we will get the end of the crank spray welded so that we can grind the journal down where you press the crank, the timing gear and the crank pulley on, get all that turned back up to size and running true so that it'll actually seal right, and then grind all of the main and rod journals to size so that we got a completely fresh crank, and set it on the shelf and keep around for a spare. So that's where we're at there. I would have showed it to you here on the bench, but Dad had to leave, so he threw it in his truck real quick and he took off. But there's not really anything exciting about me sitting here in front of the camera putting mics on and writing numbers down, so I guess I could have took video mic in it, but maybe next time. So anyway, now that we got that out of the way and I feel a whole lot better about the crank situation, that really honestly does take a little bit of stress away. And being out of a naturally aspirated block, that crank never saw the stress that the crank out of this thing saw, so we're going down a better road with a different crank. So anyway, now it's time to get the head disassembled. So yeah, on to that. Oh, and I also just got off the phone with Maybach and swapped out the 30 under main bearings that I was initially getting for that other crank, and got them swapped out for 10 unders. So luckily they had them they had those on the shelf too. They must have got a shipment in or something, because when I talked to them, well, must have been, it was before I got it out of the barn. I think it was before I even got done with tillage. However long ago was it I talked to him about it. Actually, it was when I ordered all the stuff. It sounded like bearings were going to be a problem, but so far everything, he'd say, oh yeah, we got those on the shelf, so I'll take it. And if you ever got to replace these, they make cheapy ones, and then they make good ones. The good ones are either going to have a Stanadine S on them, or they're going to say Rusamaster on them. If they don't have any sort of marking on them, they're cheap as hell, and they might only last a year. I don't think you're going to buy any of the cheap ones from a dealer. You might, but for like, I know that they sell the cheap-ass ones on eBay, and you want to avoid those. I know John Deere carries them. Agco carries them. I'm assuming most places carry them, because I think those things are fairly common. Any tractor that has a Stanadine or Rusamaster fuel system probably use those on the injectors, unless they have the old style Innova ejectors in them, and then they're going to have the brass solid lines. Okay, now we can pop these injectors. My special tool. I made this thing a long time ago for popping Stanadine injectors. You can buy the right tool for them, but I needed something right now, and this worked right now. Can't remember what tractor I made these for. I made this for. So this is interesting. I took the thermostat off to get it out of the way, and this little piece of wire was wedged in about, I tried to stick it back in there because I touched it and it fell out so I could show you guys, but it was wedged in there about like that. No, it's not part of the thermostat. It's not rusty, so it's not like it's been in there. Well, I don't know where the hell or how the hell that would have got in there. I'm confused. I wonder if that was... Huh. Lord only knows. I'm at a loss for words as to where the hell that came from. Huh. The things you find. The weird part is I've had this head off before. Like, I had it down to bare casting. And it would have had to have come out of the head, because it ain't like it could have got its way from the radiator through the thermostat. Okay, so last thing we gotta do is get the valves out. The only important thing we got to worry about here, because these heads do not use rotators on any of the exhaust valves. All the spring keepers are the same. All the springs are identical. On some heads, the exhaust and the intake springs will be different, so sometimes you got to worry about that. But on these, springs are all identical. Keepers are all identical. Retainers are all identical. Everything's identical on these, so... the only thing is, obviously, the intake and exhaust valves are different, and the intake and exhaust valves are lapped to their specific holes, so when you pull the valves out, you got to make sure they're organized so that they go back in the same cylinder they came out of. So, they actually make a special fancy-dancy tray for doing this, and it's got slots to lay all your valves in, slots for all the springs and all that bullshit. It's about yay big, and normally they go up to 8-cylinder. But around here at Broke-Ass Acre Farms, we don't do that. We just drill some holes in some pieces of white pine and number everything. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for 6 cylinders, and the holes for the valve stems. So we're going to start here in number 6. that's interesting. It's got a little, I think if I have to do a little bit of cleaning, it's got a little burr turned up on the edge of the keeper groove. So I guess we'll have to see how many are like that. And then there's obviously seals on the intake valves. Which I'll probably... Oh, that one's like that too. I wonder if they're all going to end up being like that. Well, I guess I'll run down through the line here and get all my springs and everything off, and then we'll have to clean them valve stems up a little bit so they'll come out their holes. There we go. I mean, they're not terrible. It doesn't necessarily surprise me that emery cloth wouldn't really cut it. They're hardened valves, but... And I'm not cutting, I'm just cutting flat to get the angle, or to get the burr off. I'm not cutting like at an angle, because if you do that, then the keepers are going to try to walk out. You want to keep that corner square. I mean, the rest of the valve stems look perfectly fine, so hell if I know. Okay, so I'm getting the rods ready. Got to get the wrist pin bushings out. I already took the bearing inserts out. This is that bushing that had walked part way out of the rod already, and when I got it out, a chunk fell out of it. Probably weird for somebody to be saying, but I'm really glad that this motor decided to let loose like it did, because if it hadn't, in the head gasket or whatever is causing it to pressurize the cooling system, if whatever hadn't happened, or if whatever had happened hadn't happened, we would be in a very, very, very different situation right now. Most likely with a windowed block. Man, why aren't you coming? But you can't push the bushings through because they already started to walk out of all the rods a little bit, and now they're all mushroomed over the end of the rods. So they got to come like this. But you got to get them out in such a way that you don't the bore. I don't know if you can see on camera how messed up that bushing is. The one-piece wrist pin bushings don't do that. Well, there we go. That should be everything that's got to go to the machine shop. Got the block, got the head, got the rods, and have the pistons, sleeves, rings, all that fancy-dancy stuff. Like cam bearings are in there. This is the what the one-piece wrist pin bushings look like. You know, one piece like they should be. So he has the sleeves in there so that he can test fit them when he redoes the counter bore. The only thing that he'll need is the crank when it comes back from the grind shop, and probably the bearings, but the machinist at the shop was not 100% sure he was going to be able to clean the main journals up in a 10 under grind. He thought he might have to go 20. So I'm probably still not going to order bearings until the cam gets ground, or until the crank gets ground, sorry. So basically he would need to finish balancing the rotating assembly and the crank and the rod bearings mostly. The main bearings aren't part of the rotating assembly because they don't rotate. And basically when they balance rotating assembly, they dynamically balance the crank, meaning they spin it up and find the heavy and the light spots. And then the rods, the bearings, not so much the bearings, they weigh the bearings out because there's no spot on a bearing to grind anything off to make them weigh, or to weigh them out. But basically they just go through and they make sure all the rods weigh the same, all the bearings weigh the same, all the pistons weigh the same. And like if you got two rods that are, one's heavier than the other, you make the heavy one match the light one. So you come usually down here in the bottom somewhere and you grind a little bit off until you get all your rods to weigh the same or as close as possible. Sometimes, especially on these older engines that don't spin that fast, it's almost impossible to get all the rods to weigh the same. Like when we did the engine when we did the motor in my 1955, the rods were so hard, or so he was getting to the point where he was scared to take any more off the rods to balance them out. So basically he put the rods together rods and pistons and everything together as an assembly, and made each rod piston assembly weigh the same. So I had to put a certain rod with a certain piston, and when he did it, he numbered the pistons so that I could put everything together the way he balanced it out. So sometimes it's not always that simple, especially on these older engines. So that's what we got going on there. Tomorrow I'll start working on a 3-speed, but before I do that, I'm probably going to pull Dad's truck out and get this pallet over with the chassis. That way it's out of the way and not getting moved around and stuff getting lost and tripped over and whatnot. And then I'm going to put the crank back in that block up there, because if it's in that block, it'll be safe. And when I do that, I'll make sure to get the number off the tag on that Garrett turbo for the guys that were interested. Because it'll be easier to do that than I could pull the side panel off the 1955, but it's kind of hard to see in there the way they got the tag oriented. So it'd be easier to do it on a turbo that's not on a tractor. So yeah, that's where we're at. That'll be going in Monday, and the pump will be going out next Friday. I'll have time to run it down. I use, they used to be Majera diesel injection, and now they're, USA Diesel Group or something like that down in Crown Point, Indiana. They did my 1955 pump. That's the only pump we've had them do, but they did such a good job on our pump, we've recommended them to everybody around here. And I bet since they've done our pump, I bet they've done at least a dozen other pumps that we've recommended people to, and there hasn't been a single issue, including pumps that other diesel shops have said they couldn't fix or have fucked up. So that's why we go down, take the time to drive clear down there, because they're a class act shop. So that's where we're at there. And just real quick, on the very first video I did of this, when I was pulling the motor out of the tractor, I had a guy comment this morning that he didn't like the fact that I did too much talking about, let's see, how did he word it? I want to get this right. The names don't matter, none of it matters, just the fact that this is even something that somebody is even worried about saying. His exact comment was, if you just talk about the tractor, not the drama, you'd get more subscribers. Well, first off, I've said in multiple videos, I really don't care how many subscribers I get. That's not why I'm here. This channel could have 15 subscribers or 15,000. I don't care. As long as the 15 or 15,000 people that did show up enjoy what I'm making, that's really all I care about. Basically, in nicer words, I told him to go fuck off, and he didn't like that. They never do, because I'm not here to make videos that satisfy one person. I'm here to make videos that satisfy the people that have showed up, watched the video, saw something they liked, and kept coming back. If people show up and don't see what they like and don't come back, that's fine. I'm not going to change to make the people that don't like what I'm doing show up, because then the people that have shown up and come to expect the way that things happen around here then don't like the way I've changed to satisfy the people. Okay. Basically, where I'm going with this is, this is my advice for people, or for the little guys, because I know I got a lot of guys with smaller channels that watch my channel and started up YouTube channels because of me and yada, 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 and whatnot about all that. Here's my advice for the guys that are just getting started out. First off, do not get discouraged when it takes time. There are people that start a YouTube channel and think that within a month they're going to be getting thousands of views and have, 1,000, 1,500 subscribers and yada, yada, yada. And then when that doesn't happen, they get discouraged and they quit. It takes time. It took me probably better part of 5 years before this channel really took off. It takes time. You can't just start it and expect everything to be a success right off the bat. You got to put some effort into it. You got to go through the school of hard knocks. You just keep at it, keep doing it the way you want to do it. And if you're doing it in a way that other people enjoy, you usually attract like-minded people, and it grows from there. So you don't expect your first year or even your first 2 years to be super duper. I mean, there are outliers, because of the way the YouTube algorithm works. There are outliers that show up, put on 4 or 5 videos, and the way the algorithm works, they shoot up. But that's not how it all happens. So if things aren't a success right away, do not give up. You got to keep at it. The second one is find a focus on your channel and stick to that focus. Don't be what I call a variety channel. I mean, like, I have the Oliver, my channel focuses around the Olivers and the farming and the work. The mechanic stuff and the farming, it all goes hand in hand. So basically it's a farming channel. That's what it is. Then you have don't be one of the channels where 1 minute you're driving a tractor, the next minute you're playing the next video you're playing a video game, and the next video you got cute baby kittens. That's because the guys that showed up for the tractor video ain't gonna want to watch the video game video, and the guys that showed up to watch the video game video ain't gonna want to watch the tractor video. You got to find a focus, you got to stick with it, and that's how you build a subscriber base, is because people keep showing up expecting to see the same general topic. So find a focus and stick to it. Don't have a variety channel. And there was a third thing I wanted to say, and I can't remember now what it is. Those are the big two, though, is don't come in expecting everything to be all unicorns and rainbows in the first year. And find a focus and I know the third thing. When you get people that say dumb shit like that, first off, I have found the bigger your channel gets, the more people are going to show up and say dumb shit like that. But they are the minority. And usually when people come in and like say stupid shit like that, the first thing I do is I go and I search for them, and because you can go into your YouTube studio and search for a specific commenter. And the first thing I do before I even reply back to the comment is look and see if they've ever made a comment before. And I've actually had, in the last month, I've had 2 guys leave dumb comments like that they didn't like the video they watched, and for some reason I need to change my video to suit their taste preferences. I don't know why, but so the first thing I do when somebody does that is I go back and I look and see if they've ever left a comment before. Every time I've ever had somebody come in and leave a dumb comment like that, it has been the very first comment they've ever made, and they have not been a subscriber. So that's their very first, I'm stepping my foot in the door, first impression that they make is saying something dumb like that. Usually when you want to offer constructive criticism like that, you try to build a rapport, and you comment on a few videos and show that you're trying to be an active participant in the channel and whatnot. That's not your first stepping your foot in the door while you're trying to slam it type of thing. And then they need to work on their delivery, like, hey, I enjoyed the video, but I would really, or just a friendly suggestion, you might want to do this instead of this, or yada yada yada. But what I've also found is every person I've ever had make a comment like that, where they make a suggestion about how I need to do things to grow my channel, they either have no videos or they have a bunch of videos with no views and no subscribers. So why would you listen to them if they can't even grow a channel? So my third piece of advice for anybody that's trying to start a YouTube channel like this: when you get criticism like that, it doesn't mean you have to do what they're saying. Go with what the majority of your subscribers like, not what the few idiots that don't like what you're doing like, because the few idiots that don't like what you're doing ain't going to help you any. So that's my advice for the new YouTube people. Oh, and I do have a fourth piece. Don't be the people going around commenting on videos saying, hey, I like your stuff, will you give me a shout out in your video? Okay, it might seem like a good idea at the time, and I'm not trying to sound like a dick. This is just how I feel about it. So you do you on this one, but this is just me, because I had never done that one time. I've never asked for anybody to give me a shout out, and I've never asked for anybody to subscribe to my channel. 2 things I have never done. So if you want to do that, okay, fine. But this is my take on it. It makes things sound petty. If you have to rely on the fame of other people to build your channel, yeah. I have given shout outs to people before, but they have never asked for it, and it's because they have given me a shout out in return and I never asked for it. So take that one with a grain of salt. You got to do you, but that's my 2 cents on it. So yeah, I think that covers everything I wanted to talk about. Sorry if I'm talking about the drama. But his main concern was he didn't like the fact that I told that story about the kid working at that engine shop who had to quit because his girlfriend didn't like him coming home dirty every day. And he missed the whole point of the story. The whole point of me telling that little anecdote of a story there was to illustrate to not just the mechanics among you, because I know I got a lot of mechanics, but I also probably have in my subscribers way more people that are not mechanical than what I have that are mechanical. Because it's amazing how many people that know nothing about mechanics love watching stuff like this, because it trips their trigger in their brain and, makes them think, and maybe I can inspire some people that have never lifted a wrench in their life to take on a project like this. Maybe not this size on your first step, but you get where I'm going. But my whole point about telling that story was to try to illustrate to everybody how hard it is getting in this day and age to do projects like this, because it's hard finding engine machine shops or machine shops in general, because nobody's going into the skilled trades anymore. Our industrial capacity is dwindling by the day, and people that aren't involved in heavy industry don't even realize it. Was the whole point of me telling that story. because at some point in the era of public schools, it became fashionable for everybody to be taught that dirty jobs are bad and low paying, and you can make more money if you go to college and get a white collar job. 40 years ago, might have been true. This day and age, because everybody growing up got taught that having a dirty job and being low paying makes you lower class, and you need to go to college to better yourself so you can get a white collar job and be upper class. I gotta say that, upper class with air quotes. Now our skilled trade workforce is dwindling so bad that you can go in to be a skilled machinist, and by machinist, I don't mean running a CNC or a CNC machining center. I mean actually running a boring mill or a Bridgeport or a lathe, doing custom parts or prototyping or anything like that, or going to be a welder, or going to be a heavy equipment operator, or going to be, a truck driver, especially truck drivers right now, because they say within the next 10 years, we're going to be seriously lacking on truck drivers. And they think that they're going to replace these truck drivers with these automated trucks running routes. Show me an automated truck in a snowstorm, or an automated truck hydroplaning, or an automated truck trying to go down a mountain. They think they could take the human element out of this, and maybe one day they will, but it's not going to be a day I want to live in. But anyway, so basically that was my whole point of telling that story, and he completely missed the fucking boat on why I told that story, was because I'm trying to illustrate to the fact that we need more people going into skilled trades. We need more people going into machining. We need more people going into fabrication. We need more people to make the world go around, because guess what? You can take an office worker, they could lose their job, and the world ain't gonna know. You get rid of all the pipeline welders, or you get rid of all the pipe fitters, or you get rid of all the electricians, the world's gonna know. Not that I'm trying to belittle the white collar workers, but there are blue collar jobs where you're going to go out and you're going to get dirty 12 hours a day, where you're probably going to make more money than a lawyer. There are certain welding jobs right now where you can walk in and set your own salary because they're screaming for them that bad. Engine machinists, you can't find any. There's the guy that I'm taking my engine block to says he cannot physically find anybody to train to grind cranks anymore. Nobody wants to. That was the whole reason I went into that story, was to illustrate that point, and he missed it. And for some reason he didn't, I don't know. But like I say, the name of the person that made the comment doesn't matter. You don't need to go looking for the comment. Doesn't matter. He doesn't need the attention. I just wanted to illustrate that point and kind of show some of the bullshit that YouTube people or people that put stuff on YouTube have to go through and deal with on a daily basis. 99.99% of you are awesome. It's that 0.01% that are just assholes. So, sorry, that was my rant. I didn't mean to talk this long. I really didn't. So, anyway, tomorrow we have the drawing for the Wyckoff bag and the hat. I already have the have the person picked. I know who it is, but I did it the morning after Christmas to get that out of the way before any more comments got added. So I already know who won, but we'll do that video, and then I'm gonna start working on the 3-speed. So that's what we got coming up. Probably gonna get 2 videos back to back on that one. So anyway, before I piss somebody off by talking too much about drama, that's it for this one. We'll catch you guys on the next one.